All right, good evening, folks. Thank you very, very much for joining us. I'm telling you, you're going to be glad that you did. Our first guest during this wonderful hour that you and I are going to share together is a noted author now, but he has a background in so many other things. He is a veteran of the Vietnam War. As a matter of fact, he was awarded, among other awards that he received, the Bronze Star, the Purple Heart, and you named them. He was what we would all, I think, accurately call a hero for all of us. I think we recognize that. He worked in New York City for a good number of years, 12 to be exact, and in high positions there in the Bronx area of New York, for example, in the leadership positions there, worked some with the mayor at that time, has worked some with the president of the United States at that time too, while he was serving the city of New York. He also is a leading businessman, a chief executive officer of an agro-business agency. He's been in the computer business and involved in so many things, but the main thing we're going to talk with him about during this time that we have together is about his book. It's called Surrender Management, America in Retreat. It is a 507-page book. It's up on Amazon already, as well as Barnes & Noble, easily accessible now, and I know that you're going to want to take advantage of getting an early edition of his book. We're talking about Carlos Arce. Carlos, good to have you with us, sir.
Thank you, Reese. Very happy to be here with you.
Very happy to have you. And Justin in our control room back there has your book, and he'll have it on the screen now. Already has put it up there, and we're putting it up a number of times. What is this book about?
Well, Justin, this is about our major national problems and how our country has been practicing what I call in the book surrender management.
Yes.
By postponing solutions indefinitely.
Right.
But simply allowing the problems to grow out of control and to continue to look the other way, right, while our nation is at the brink of a financial, social, even geopolitical collapse.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I have read your book, so there'll be sometimes it'll look like I'm putting words in your mouth because I've read the book, much to my credit. I'm glad that I did, and I told you off camera, there's nothing in your book that I don't support, and I believe the overwhelming majority of people in this country will support not only your identification of the crises that we're in and the various problems that we're faced with, but also you go much further than that. You go into solutions, ways that we can solve them. What would you say are the central problems? Just zeroing in on the central problems.
I would say that at the personal and institutional level, we have ceased to be responsible.
Okay.
We have really become an irresponsible nation, an irresponsible country. We cannot go on heading into financial suicide on the one end and practicing this surrender management on all our national problems like immigration and education and energy dependence, and our citizens demanding unaffordable benefits and entitlements.
Unaffordable is the key.
Unaffordable, without offering the kind of service or involving themselves in the political process the way they should to prevent this crisis from growing.
That leads me to the next topic in your book, and it's called Cuts in Entitlement. And you say massive cuts in entitlement. And yet I know I've gotten to know you over these past 3 days. I got to know you quite well, and I'm glad that I did. I know that you are a very compassionate person, and you recognize that there are certain needs, human needs in this country that we as a collective society need to take part in easing the situation that people are under. I know you recognize that, but then you use that term massive cuts. How do you go about doing that?
We are in fact a compassionate society.
Yes.
And we will always take care of the weak and the poor and those that have need.
As we should.
For our society has to have a safety net. And we designed safety nets when we created Social Security, Medicare, and all the entitlements are precisely a safety net. And the problem is that has become excessive to a point that it's not completely affordable. It has grown beyond our capacity as a nation. And the political leaders are unable to face the American public with the truth, which is really what the problem is. And the American people are full of common sense, and they just like to see a fair deal. And what I'm suggesting is every person in the country should be given personal accounting. Here's how much money you put into the system. That's your money. And here's how much interest, fair interest, we should pay you for your money. And this is the total amount that you have. When you use that, after you use your money, then we would have to see if you have your own means to continue to support yourself.
And if you do, no more money, right?
If you already use your money and you don't have the resources yourself, then there still has to be, because we're a compassionate nation, a social care program that takes care of everybody who needs it. But wealthy Americans can no longer continue to suggest that because they participated in the entitlement programs at the beginning,
they can get more back than they put in.
That they can get 4 or 5 times more without touching their own resources, and then forcing this nation into borrowing abroad and getting us into bankruptcy. And that is absolutely not a fair deal. That's an abusive deal.
And it abuses the taxpayers too.
It certainly does.
All right, now a little personal side here. Your lovely wife, Olga, works with you in most everything you do, doesn't she?
She's part of my life, and I certainly couldn't do anything I do without her.
How about that? Olga, you heard that, right? And you've also got 3 sons and 2 daughters.
That's correct.
And one of your sons, I know, Dan, is very much involved in working with the government, really, isn't he?
He's a special agent for the Department of Health and Human Services, yes.
And also, I want to mention Gladys and Danielle Sanchez. They live down in the same area that you live there. And Gladys, as a matter of fact, gave me a call about you. You watched the program on the internet down there, and then one of the interviews that we had here on TAC 9 gives me an opportunity to say to our television viewers once again, folks, I want you to recognize, I know I'm being a little boastful here, but I'm really not. I'm just being proud of the fact that we have an entity here, a television station that goes far beyond these borders. Carlos Arce, for example, sitting right across from me now, a noted author already now, would not have been aware of this program and of this station had he not seen it on the internet. And he traveled all the way from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, to be in this area, to be a part of what we're doing right here. So what we have going here is a center point of communication techniques that really is just about unsurpassed, and we're very proud of that. Now, talking about Gladys and Danielle, and then you called me, and you talked about coming up here and being on the program. And, of course, Terry and Frank, you know them very well also down in that area. Now, the new dedicated tax. Now, people don't like to hear dedicated or otherwise anything about taxes being imposed. What are you talking about?
Well, again, I go back to this concept that the American people have a lot of common sense and they believe in fairness. The problem with taxes is that we know that every time the government raises a penny of taxation from us, we never know where it goes to. Once it gets to Washington, it gets mismanaged, it gets misappropriated. It is used to buy votes again. And there are major problems that need to be solved. I suggest taxation that is dedicated, and we have done some experiments like this in the past, but one question, we have a debt, $15 trillion debt, $15 trillion growing by $2 trillion every year, plus unfunded obligations. We have to pay that debt. It's not like we're going to be arguing about reducing the growth of the debt by peanuts. $2 trillion a year, and we argue over $200 billion a year, and a super committee can even come back with an answer on that. So paying the debt, if we told the American people we have a tax that's dedicated to paying the debt and cannot be used for anything else, there won't be much of in my view, there won't be much opposition to that. We all know this has to be done. In my book, I asked for a dedicated tax for 3 specific purposes, which I think are required to solve our problems as a country. One is that debt repayment, which should be some kind of amortization, like a national mortgage over the lifespan of a generation. Also for a national service program, which I argue in the book. And number 3, for an energy super fund, so we can get out of this energy dependence. And we can talk for hours on any of those topics.
On the energy, yes. Now the energy super fund. Would you recommend that we really look seriously at exploring for energy in our own country here? I mean, getting down beneath the surface of the earth here in our country and drilling for energy, drilling for oil.
I think my answer would be, as it was said in the past by many other people, all of the above is the answer.
All of the above, right.
We have to definitely get our resources. But my view of the energy is not only that we can solve it and should, but that we can be the greatest energy exporter in the world.
How about it?
We have
We've got the technology.
We have a balance of trade deficit that we'll never get out of, because we're not going to compete with China with production or countries where the salaries are 1/10
That energy
of ours.
we could export, though, could make the big difference.
It could make a tremendous difference.
Yeah.
We can be the energy king of the world.
Now, you point out something too on illegal immigration. A lot of people watching us right now, obviously, and there's no reason why they really wouldn't know this, because it gets in depth beyond what people have really the inclination or time to bother with. But in the illegals that come here, and we have a lot of them here already, probably more than the 12 million that we talk about. But anyway, you point out that a lot of this illegal immigration comes about by way of air and sea rather than the border. What percentage is that we're talking about?
Most estimates will say that 60% of the illegal immigration is coming across the Mexican border. And there's roughly 40% that will be coming by...
Almost half, really.
Almost half by other means. Visa violators, people coming in as tourists, as students, as temporary workers, and then they stay. Plus, you have the boat people that come into Florida from Cuba, the Dominican Republic, Haiti, as well as the territory of Puerto Rico, which is also a way of entering the United States. And there is large numbers of these people coming in illegally. So the problem, it goes far beyond building a fence on the border. And of course, I have my book, and I don't know how much time we have to discuss the details, but I have quite a few suggestions as to what we need to do.
Presidential candidate Newt Gingrich came out with a proposal recently that rankled a whole lot of people and pleased a whole lot of people as well. And that was he wanted to look at a maybe quote unquote practical approach toward dealing with and I'll use that figure again, 12 million illegals that are already in this country, and some of them been here for years in this country. I know that I'm sure, knowing how you keep abreast of what's going on, that you watched and listened to that idea or those ideas that Gingrich had. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think that he's trying to be sensible about the question of what to do with the ones that are here.
Yes.
I also know Mr. Gingrich and most of the other candidates, most of all candidates in the country and all figures in the country now accept the fact that we have to do something about the border.
Yes.
The problem is that in doing something about the border, it always ends up being some window dressing, while we then allow, and we have had 7 amnesties, one after the other since 1986. Mr. Gingrich is saying very reasonably we cannot take a position where we're going to ask 12 million people to leave the country, or that we're going to have the means even to say that we're going to physically arrest them and deport them. That is just asking for chaos in the nation, and it would be insane to do so. So when he says people that have established themselves here, who haven't committed crimes, who have behaved appropriately, certainly we have to find some way of letting them survive as productive citizens rather than forcing them into the underground. But the main question is, how do we deal with not only the border, but how do we deal with the illegal immigration inflow that continues? Because they're coming in undigestible numbers.
Right. How have we failed in education? Obviously, there's a failure here because we're not really meeting the standards that most people feel that we have the capacity and the ability to meet, but we're not doing it. What's happening?
The first thing that troubles me, and I have seen several times now, this movie Waiting for Superman, it shows all the shortcomings of the system, and there are many, but it places too much of an emphasis on blaming teachers. And I think that our teachers as a group in the nation deserve a lot of credit for doing an awful lot under conditions that are impossible. Right. And I think we should recognize and reward them a little better rather than blaming them. I certainly see real problems with the teachers' union and the excesses that they insist on forcing on the system. But if I were to look at the education system and find one structural change that I would favor, would be to mainstream only those that are able to meet a standard that we set as a competitive standard for world competition.
Right.
It's not taking a school and setting a standard to equal what the school as a group can do as a totality of the student body and see how far they can go, and that's the standard. The standard has to be where it has to be, and then those that can meet the standard become the mainstream. We cannot continue to throw everybody into the classroom. Students that do not have the intellectual range, students that have emotional problems, students that have delinquency problems, all sorts of limitations in students. Put them all in one classroom and say the classroom now has to wait for everybody to catch up. We don't want to have a system as we do, no student left behind. Yes, we don't want to have no student left behind, but we also should have no student held behind. We need a winning team. Our mainstream schools should produce a winning team to compete in the world, and we have the means to do that.
Okay, let's talk about citizen involvement. That's one of the key issues in your book, is the involvement of the citizenry on a large scale. For example, starting with the Tea Party movement, how do you feel about that as it pertains to citizen involvement?
I think the Tea Party movement has shown that citizen involvement can bring real change to our society. I'm not going to endorse every position of the Tea Party, but I certainly would endorse the existence of an organized party of any kind that really gets involved and brings about change. I argue in the book for not only the Tea Party, but for citizens everywhere, whatever their issue may be, that whether they recognize that we have an illegal immigration catastrophe, that we have an education crisis, that we have an energy crisis, to move into these areas, to organize and to really put pressure on those elected officials to really represent us so we can have a true representative democracy, because we don't have that. We have a lot of pressure, special interest groups that are moving the country.
Now, getting back to disconnected youth again, there's something you propose in your book that's kind of intriguing, and that is the draft. That's a terrible word to a lot of people, you know, when you talk about the draft, because we have a volunteer army that many people maintain has worked quite well and does not infringe on the liberty of our people. That is to say that you must come in and you must serve if we call you. How do you feel about that? How would you handle that?
I would bring back the draft. I do not believe that the volunteer army is the success that it is presented as being. On the one hand, it's extremely expensive. We don't have a volunteer army because we have people knocking the doors down to serve in our wars. There are tens of thousands of dollars in bonuses for enlistment and re-enlistment. The cost is astronomical, and then we never have enough soldiers. And what we do when we go to war, like in Iraq or Afghanistan, half of the people that we send there are civilian contractors. Again, a much higher cost than even the professional soldiers that we have. So the cost to the nation is astronomical and unaffordable. On the other hand, you know, I served a tour in Vietnam. I can't fathom that anybody would have told me at that time that I would have had to go back 2 or 3 times.
But you did.
I couldn't, well, I went once.
You went?
But I wouldn't,